Welcome back, superstar. Michelle Villalobos here to talk about how to heal from your trauma on your own. Now, you might be wondering, what is a business coach doing talking about healing trauma? Well, I will tell you. First of all, I found out for myself that a lot of my childhood wounds and experiences were getting in the way of the business transformation that I wanted to experience, the wealth that I wanted to generate, and the joy that I wanted to feel. And as I started doing more and more coaching and consulting work, I realized that it wasn't just me, that every single one of my clients had wounds and trauma and things that were holding them back from their fullest expression in business. I found that my clients were struggling with feelings of worthiness, of lack of safety in expression, of fear. All of these things came from some sort of trauma or wounding. And when we were able to work through these things, and when I personally was able to work through these things, all of a sudden new possibilities opened up for us in the business. Now, I want to be clear that what I'm talking about here doesn't necessarily replace therapy if it's needed. I'm not talking about healing deep-seated PTSD trauma that's causing massive issues in your life. I am talking about the things that are getting in the way of your fullest expression, that you can become more empowered around those things, that you can take charge of your own healing. You can manage and grow on your own without a whole lot of support, especially if you can't or don't have that availability of that support. What I am talking about is a way to heal that's worked for me and that's worked for many of my clients. Now, before I get into the quote unquote steps involved in healing your own trauma, I do want to share a little bit about my personal story. About 7.5, almost 8 years ago, I had a really, really difficult experience in my life. I was engaged to get married, and about 6 months before the wedding, I found out that the person that I was engaged to had basically faked his entire life. He had faked a job. He had faked that he was divorced. He had faked business trips. He had faked bank account statements and all sorts of other crazy things. Now, this obviously, for me at least, I don't know if it's obvious, but for me, it sent me down a very dark path in my life. I had a really, what I call my dark night of the soul. And in this dark night of the soul, I let myself feel it fully. In fact, I think it was the only time or the first time in my life that I really allowed myself to go all the way into a pain or a depression. This lasted for a couple months. During that time, I also got a really serious health diagnosis, and I also took my foot off the gas and my business basically dried up. So in the span of 2 months, I lost my romantic relationship, my health, and my business success kind of all at once. In hindsight, I feel like it had to happen this way, because what ended up happening was I really ultimately just cracked all the way open. And what poured out initially was the anger, the pain, the sadness of the problems that I was facing in that moment, the relationship, the health, the business. But as things went on, what ended up coming out was stuff from my childhood. Old things that I'd never dealt with were starting to surface. I think it was my body, my soul, perhaps my heart, taking advantage of the opportunity of me opening up to start to process old things that I'd never addressed before. Now, luckily in this period of my life, I met a mentor who understood the value of processing these things, of this trauma, of this wounding. And he helped guide me, along with a few others. They helped guide me along a path of processing what I had been through. And it was in that experience that I first felt what it was like to heal something and let something go and start to move forward without the baggage that had been holding me back. And so from that moment on, I started to incorporate some of this work into the business consulting and coaching I was doing. I was starting to recognize in others what I had experienced myself, that there were these old stories, old baggage that were holding people back, that were creating limiting beliefs, that were creating fear, that were creating resistance to their fullest, biggest self. And so that's where these steps that I'm going to share with you came from. Now, before I keep going and share with you what the steps actually are, I do want to invite you to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and perhaps even post a comment below about what you've dealt with and what you've come through in your life. So the first of the 7 steps that I want to share with you is what I call discover. Discover is where we become aware of what is going on, of what the trauma even is. We become aware of where it possibly even comes from, although we don't actually have to know exactly what happened or where it comes from to heal it. But we do have to discover the pattern that's showing up currently in our lives. When I talk about what the pattern is, what I'm looking for is what are the triggers and what happens to you? What is the thing that you don't want to experience anymore? So for example, if you find that you're always getting into an argument with a particular person, let's say it's a particular client, and right now, up until now, perhaps you've blamed it on that person. You've blamed it on the client. What I want you to do in the season of discover, in the stage of this discover stage, is to turn it around and say, all right, what if it isn't you? What if you are just poking a wound in me? Where is that wound from? Like, for example, if you have somebody that says something a certain way and you get upset by it, it feels disrespectful, right? Turn it around and say, all right, what in me is feeling disrespected? And when have I felt this before? And really looking back and seeing when did this feeling of being disrespected started? When did it first start to matter to me to feel respected, right? So really digging into the feelings that you feel and what's going on. And from that place, asking too, what's it costing me to have this reaction when I feel disrespected? Is it costing me the relationship with this person? Is it costing us the intimacy that we could have? So really in a season, in this stage of discover, it's looking at what's happening in me rather than blaming it on something outside, and paying attention to what that's costing you. Looking for the patterns, looking for potential sources of this issue. The second thing is this concept of transformation, transforming what's happening into something else. So what that requires, first and foremost, is to feel the feelings that you feel. One of the biggest problems that I find that I've faced and that I see my clients facing is the resistance to the feelings, to the not wanting to feel the feelings that are there and pushing them down and even covering them up with other things like food or alcohol or drugs or shopping or gambling or whatever it may be, maybe all of the above. And so that often requires us to feel feelings that we're really uncomfortable with. Feelings like shame or guilt or anger. So like, for example, I had a client who had a really hard time when she would get angry. She would suppress it and she wouldn't feel it. And we discovered, as we were digging into her past, we discovered that she had a father that was a rager. And so when he would rage, she would go small and she never wanted to be like him. And so she made it not okay to ever feel anger. But it's impossible for a human being not to feel anger. It's on the spectrum of emotions. It's part of being human. So when we suppress that, other problems pop up, right? So notice, by the way, in this stage, what feelings are off limits to you? Feelings that are off limits, feelings that you are not willing to feel, like anger or rage or shame or whatever it is, are often a clue into areas of wounding back from childhood. So recognizing and then transforming by feeling it. I have a mentor, Nanilea Diamond, who calls it alchemy. Alchemy is the feeling of the feelings and the converting of those feelings into something positive. So when we can fully feel the anger and the rage and let it move all the way through us in a safe way, not directed at somebody, not hurting somebody, but in a safe way into a pillow or into a towel or something like that, we can feel it. Usually once we felt it and it's moved through, on the other side is a new possibility of letting go, of forgiving, of releasing. The third thing is to take on from that place of having moved it through, is there a new perspective here? Is there another way to look at this trauma, look at this experience? Can my client, for example, could she look at the experience of growing up with her rager father and perhaps see it as a gift, as a way of developing her own empathy and her own compassion? Can she find the gifts, the fruits of having experienced that trauma or that wounding? So whatever the trauma or the wounding is, just from a purely intellectual perspective, you might not feel it yet, but can you perceive that there are gifts from the experience. Once you're able to do that intellectually, I encourage you to take the opportunity to perhaps create a little ritual for yourself to let it go. In a ritual format, in a way that's intentional, to create some sort of experience of officially, formally letting it go. I release this. It might be writing it all down on a journal piece of paper and then lighting it on fire, or dumping it in the trash can ceremoniously, or ripping it to shreds, or cutting it into pieces. If there's a way that you can transform it physically and alchemize it physically, it's a way to also transform it and alchemize it in your person, in your embodied experience. Once you've been able to let it go in that way, then are you able to bring forgiveness into your heart? Can you truly forgive the person or the experience or yourself, whatever it was, and let it go, but go one step even beyond letting it go and actually forgiving? And then taking it even one step further and actually blessing it. Can you bless the experience? Can you bless the person who wronged you? Can you bless them not because it's okay what they did or what happened, but because it led you here to this place of having been able to alchemize and now turning it into something positive? My mentor, Nanilea, who I've mentioned a lot, by the way, and one of these days I'm going to have her come on this channel. She talks about blessing the fruits of the season and looking at everything as fruits of the season. What if everything was a harvest? What if everything, quote, good or bad, was part of the plan, was part of the big picture? If you could trust that everything happened for you, what would it look like if you could bless all of it? And of course, that leads to the final step, which is, can you come into gratitude? Can you literally say, thank you that this happened to me? Thank you for this experience. Thank you for giving me the gift of compassion or empathy or empowerment or strength as a result of having been through this experience. Those are the steps that I recommend embarking on if you want to heal your own trauma. If this was helpful for you, interesting for you, then I invite you to check out some of my other videos. I have videos about business coaching, about selling, marketing, branding yourself, scaling and growing a successful business, as well as videos about spiritual and personal development. Enjoy.